Welcome everyone to week 3. This week we're going to be talking about the importance of communication and why we should study it. We're also going to talk about understanding the self. This week for your online assignment, everything is due by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, September 14th. The lectures are going to cover parts of chapter 1 and 2, and also we'll look at selecting a speech topic for your informative speech. And so we need to get started in brainstorming on some of the ideas that you can have for a 5 to 7 minute informative speech. The assignments will be a quiz on chapters 1 and 2. There's some videos I'd like you to review and do just a short review on those videos with a fill-in-the-blank paper assignment. And then also I'd like to know what topic it is you're interested in talking about for your informative speech, and that will be a quick journal entry. Monday, September 15th for the classroom, we will again review pieces of the chapters 1 and 2. What we don't cover, you're still responsible for the test, so please make sure you read those chapters. And I also want you to bring an artifact to share. And what is an artifact? When you review this lecture, you'll find out more of what I'd like you to bring to class. So objectives for this week. After viewing the lectures, you will be able to identify basic concepts of communications and the reasons we communicate. You'll understand the components of an informative speech, and you'll select a topic to present for your informative speech. After you attend class, you'll be able to gain a better understanding of how symbols and meaning impact our communication. And you'll also realize how perception influences our reaction to situations and to people. Okay, for chapter 1, we're just going to go over the basics of communication and hopefully give you an appreciation how this is a fascinating subject, and it's been around for a long time and continues to evolve and change as we evolve and change our communication styles. The definition in the textbook: communication is the process by which individuals use symbols, signs, and behaviors to exchange information. So again, every day we talk in many different ways. We may do it verbally, non-verbally, through technology, through our emotions, lots of different ways that we communicate our feelings and our thoughts and our opinions to other people. The functional perspective of communication, basically if you ask what that means, is why do we communicate? What's the purpose? And again, as I've emphasized in week 1, that communication definitely helps us begin, maintain, and end relationships. So it really is the foundation of the reason that we interact with other people and have relationships with other people, or that we don't have relationships with other people. So what is a relationship? It's the interconnection or the interdependence between two or more people that function to achieve some goal. So if you think about people in your life that are important to you, the reason they are important to you and you're important to them is because you each contribute something to a common goal. We typically do not associate with people that we don't have the same values or goals or interests with, and so when we have these connections, we are very dependent on each other in order to make the relationship work. Thus we have interdependence within the relationship. Communication is the tool we use to maintain that relationship. So why do we communicate? We communicate, according to the textbook, for 3 primary functions. One is to express our affiliation, another is to achieve goals, and another is to influence others. So affiliation means basically that we express our feelings for each other, and most of us need that at some level. We need to know that we belong and that we are valued. And so how we do that is expressing that feeling to other people and telling them that they are loved, that they are cared for, that they're appreciated. That all helps cement that bond of affiliation. Achieving goals, you're going to change your style of communication depending on who you're talking to and what you want to get from them. Again, the best example of that, and I'll use this a lot during the semester, is between a parent and a child. children have many different ways of trying to get what they want. They'll either be very sweet, and if that doesn't work, they may turn to being throwing a temper tantrum to get their way. They may manipulate in some way. If you watch a parent and child and watch how the child tries to get their goal, tries to reach their goal, it's quite interesting how they can play on the parent's emotions. Another is influencing other, and again, this is a way of achieving goals, is by influencing others to follow you. And so that comes down to control and power. And depending on who has the control and power in the relationship, they usually can be very influential in getting others to follow what they need. So again, how do we communicate? We understand why we communicate, but we use symbols. We talked about this at the beginning of class in week 1, and that symbols are basically arbitrary constructions that we agree as a group that has meaning. And this is where there can be language barriers or communication barriers, is because what we mean for a symbol to be may be very different from someone else. So for example, if you looked at this image, most of you, if your English is your primary language, you would look at this image and you would say that is a house. So we as a group decide first of all what symbols we're going to use to depict this image, and we use the letters of the alphabet, and then we also decide how those letters sound when we verbalize them. Those of you who speak Spanish, if you saw this image and someone asked what this image was, you would say it was a casa. And again, those who speak Spanish, that group has decided that the meaning is the same, the image is the same, but how they pronounce it or how they depict it is very different. And this is where we can sometimes get ourselves in trouble with nonverbal communication, because what we agree as a group means something in a nonverbal gesture means something very different to another culture. And so it's always good to, if you're ever going to travel to another country or to another culture, to find out quickly what symbols mean to them, because you could offend the host party quite quickly, and people have a lot of stories about that they didn't know that a certain gesture meant something totally different to what they thought it was, and it can really cause some problems. Okay, so again, the sign there is the OK sign. That seems fine with us, but a sign to the right, and I don't know which one that is, I apologize, but that type of symbol may seem very offensive to someone else from a different culture or group. So when we talk about symbols, one of the things we talk about are artifacts. And so if you think about symbols in your house, your neighborhood, your state, or your country, those symbols are depicting something that's important to you typically. And we call those symbols artifacts. So one common artifact in most people's homes would be pictures. And so most people have photos of something that's important to them. It may be family members, it may be an animal, it may be a vacation spot, it may be a sport, who knows, but a lot of times there's lots of photos in people's homes, and that definitely is depicting your values and what's important to you. When we look in your neighborhood, your state, or your country, flags come to mind. A lot of flags are artifacts, and they mean something to that group. Okay, it may not mean anything to an outside group. One of the first things I do when I go see people, I kind of look at their bookshelf to see what books do they have on display. Now not so much, but they used to have CDs and records, and you would kind of look at that to see what type of music that they preferred. So you got to really understand and know someone quickly just by what they displayed in their home. An artifact for me, for example, is you may come into my house and you may see a plant that's a bamboo plant, and you may just look at that and think that that's a decorative piece of art, I guess you could say, is a bamboo plant. But to me it has a lot more meaning. I read a book called The Tao of Womanhood, and in that they talked about how bamboo is one of the strongest materials on the earth, and that when storms come, the bamboo may bend and it may twist, but it never breaks. And it was a reminder to me that when hard times come into someone's life, or come into my life, you may get bent and you may get twisted, but you should never break. You should continue to just weather that storm and continue to go on with your life. So even though the artifact to me has importance, if no one understood what that symbol was, to them it would look like just an ordinary houseplant. So that's what I want you to do on September 15th. I want you to look around your home or something within your possession that is significant to you. And to others it may just look like an ordinary object. And I want you to share that object with your fellow classmates and explain to them why this artifact is important to you. Okay? If you want some extra credit, you can get 5 points by just writing a short summary. It can be a half page or it can be on an index card, and I just want you to just share with me what that artifact is and why it's important to you. So in order to get the extra credit, you must write a short summary and have it turned in to me. Just turn it in with your name tag and you'll get 5 points for bringing an artifact. Okay, with chapter 1, a lot of times what we'll do too is we'll look at these symbols and we'll start basically organizing them and putting them in order, so that we have some more sense to our world. And so we call this coding. So a code is basically a set of symbols and they're joined to make a meaningful message. And when you are going to send a message, you very quickly in your brain encode. So you are putting together your message in your brain and you're ready to get it ready for production, meaning it's getting ready to be sent. So you're taking these symbols and putting them together as well as you can to send a message. Where it comes a little bit tricky is the person has to decode the message that you've encoded. And so hopefully you're in agreement as to what the sounds and symbols are that you're using. And if not, that's where we can have conflict. So one of the best examples I can give is between men and women. And we will have a short lecture on gender and gender differences with communication. But many times what we say is not what we mean, and we expect the other person to be able to decode that meaning, and oftentimes it doesn't work. So that's just one of the challenges we have when it comes to gender, and also especially with culture. So real quickly, chapter 1 talks about communication models. One of the earlier models and theories was called linear communication, and basically the receiver does not play an active role. So the sender sends a message and the receiver receives it. An example of that today would be of TV. So when we're watching TV, we are getting messages, but we have no way of responding back. That is changing with technology, but it's still pretty much a one-way transmittal of information. There isn't like a healthy dialogue going back. So even if we can respond, for example, American Idol, you can text in or call in a vote or whatever it may be, a talk show, you may be able to be a caller online. It's still extremely limited as far as the ability to have dialogue or to have multiple people on a dialogue. The sender-receiver model is basically I send you information and I decode it, and I let you know that I got the information and that I decoded it. So I repeat back or recall what you have told me. And so, for example, if we're doing a verbal examination, I ask you a question based on something I told you earlier, you can repeat that back. Okay? So there really isn't much information as far as you could remember it, but could you understand it? That type of communication doesn't quite happen as well as it could. The competent communication, and that's what we're going to be looking at this semester, is how we become more competent communicators. That's also called the transactional model of communication. And it begins to appreciate all the different complexities of communication, that it isn't that simple just to send a message, the receiver gets it and understands it and reacts to it. There's a lot of other components going on. And so what happens with competent communication is those slashed or diagonal bars there, that's called noise, because there's always noise going on, and that makes it even more difficult for two people to have a dialogue. There's also just the internal noise, which could be daydreaming, your cultural background, your values, your goals. Those are all internal noises going on. So when someone's sending you a message, you are actually trying to decipher it with a lot of noise going on, and sometimes interrupting into the message of what it was intended to be. Okay, many of you mentioned that you'd like to improve your listening, and that definitely is the sign of a competent communicator, is the ability to listen well. And when you do listen, you're still involved. You are still an active participant in the communication model of a competent communicator. And what it does also is gives you an excellent amount of information and the ability to decipher more easily because you're listening rather than trying to fill in the blanks. Communication is definitely linked to culture. It does not have to be intentional, and this happens a lot with nonverbal communication. Sometimes we may do something, a body movement or a gesture, and the other person takes it as a communication when actually it wasn't. So sometimes we are communicating when we're not intending to. Lots of different ways to communicate, and we'll talk about that throughout the semester. And also we are going to focus on the transactional process of communication so that it's always a reminder we're always sending and we're always receiving messages, which again can create a conflict if we're not careful. Competent communication is definitely process oriented, so we are looking for an outcome, and also there's steps to being a competent communicator, and we will learn that throughout the semester. We know when to communicate appropriately, and we're more effective when we take our time to really assess the situation and communicate according to the situation. And definitely involves behavioral routines based on social understandings. This is where our culture comes in. And so we understand that given certain circumstances, we're going to behave differently. That's a competent communicator. So my examples there, if you're at church, you're at a sporting event, or you're at work, you're going to behave differently simply because the context requires that. Okay. Also, a competent communicator is going to be looking at the relationships that exist and try to understand how the parties work together, because that definitely drives communication. We definitely are probably more relaxed and comfortable around people that we've known for many years, and they accept us for who we are. It's very different from someone we first meet, maybe a job interview, maybe someone that we're interested in pursuing a relationship with. Those first impressions are very different than those of people that we've had long-term relationships with. And so that relational context makes a difference in how we communicate. Situational context is another context that competent communicators are aware of. They address their surroundings, and they look to see who else is involved and where they're involved, and what can happen if maybe the communication isn't appropriate, what the outcome of that could be. And cultural context is very important, and it's something that's gaining even more importance, especially in the workplace. And we'll talk in depth with that about how culture makes a huge difference on how we communicate. Okay, so just don't forget that on Monday the 15th, definitely bring an artifact. This is really a fun exercise, and people really appreciate people sharing a very personal part of their life. And so we appreciate everyone bringing an artifact so that you can share with each other. And don't forget to complete the quiz on chapters 1 and 2. You need to review both PowerPoint presentations, and feel free to use your textbook to complete the quizzes. The questions will come directly from those chapters, and so you should be able to find the answers quickly. Thank you.